Welcome back, Rob, for the Valuation Multiplier. My name is Nuno Godinho, and today's episode is about the most misunderstood function in business, which is sales and everything that is included. So Rob has led companies through international expansion, post-merger revenue alignment, and investor stage growth to market acceleration. So today, we have the pleasure to be with him and dig into how companies embed this commercial excellence into the fabric of business and why your next valuation leap likely starts with better sales alignment. So thank you very much, Rob, for being here today.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. So let's start with a kind of strategic framing. And my first question is, so when you look at companies that are trying to scale globally and as an executive, also as an investor, what's the biggest revenue mistake they make early days?
Yeah. If it's a scaling company, we often know it's about focus, right? So, sometimes you can get carried away with being opportunist and then spreading your resources a bit too thinly. That is a very common mistake. But I think we can actually go back and help people avoid that mistake by actually looking at these sort of principles of sales. So before you get carried away and start thinking you can conquer the world, you want to get footprint everywhere before your IPO or whatever it might be. It really is, there's two things. You've got to look at the foundations first before you start scaling. So I think that's one of the things that we can go into in a little bit more detail today.
Fantastic. And that's very important because one of the things that I've seen and we've discussed is that looking at sales as a leadership system and not just a department where you go and it's all about sell, sell, sell. It's how you sell. It's how you align everything that is critical because everybody in the company is a sales, of course. And as you mentioned, it's about getting that focus because sometimes, as you mentioned, it's the trying to hit everything that moves is not a good strategy if you want to get successful.
Yeah, I want to break that down. As you said, sales is a leadership system, not a department. And then the next thing to talk about is, well, what do we mean by that, right? So the whole system, we often talk, when we've talked about finance and product, et cetera, in the past, we've talked about getting everybody's got to be drinking the Kool-Aid, right? All the departments have got to be motivated and aligned and everything. So often we fall into this trap where we're looking for the hero salesperson, right? Or we're going to blow the budget. We're going to Germany. You can't find enterprise SaaS salespeople for Germany. It always seems to be the one thing that pops up as an example. And it isn't about individual heroics. And the same thing, it's not just about the founder CEO who might be a good salesperson that suddenly they become the bottleneck and they're the ones who have all the relationships. And we've all fallen in this trap before. We've got someone who performs super well and we're just happy for them to go out there and be a bit of a cowboy. But then you go back and think, well, actually, they're not really sticking to the pricing chart. They're getting the R&D team tied up in knots because they're asking for things that are not part of the core product attribute. And you're sure that we paid them the biggest bonus this year and they earned the most on revenue, but we made a loss on everything that they delivered. So that's a dramatic experience, but actually it's a real world example that came up in conversation with a former colleague earlier in the week that we were recalling this. So a lot of this, our whole theme, right, for what we've been doing with these podcasts, Nuno, is about getting the valuation up as well, right, and securing the valuations. If you've got these heroics that maybe are not aligned with other people or the departments, the realities of margin versus revenue, etc., then it's not going to be very predictable. Or you're reliant on a superstar salesperson or one of the founders who has the relationships. So being predictable or predictability, thank you, is the foundation of the valuation. It's solid to say the ratchet of the valuation, the multiple of revenue or EBITDA, et cetera, is based on having all of these things in place now. But also that's fine for scaling. But if it's really still a deep tech and looking quite far forward, you want the investors to bet on the future. And so as predictable as you can make that the better the discounted cash flow or whatever it might be on that valuation. And how do you do that? Well, there's lots of things that we can go into, and forgive me, I've got a few notes here, and I'll try not to look at my notes too much. But I know that one thing that always comes up for me when I'm doing a deep dive on due diligence is looking at the pipeline, looking at how long sales take, who's handling those sales, which products are selling, etc. So if you don't have a CRM system in place, it's very difficult to be able to show that to someone. And when I talk about the CRM, it isn't just about saying customer relationship management. Do we know who our customers are? We know where we are with our customers. And I'll quote. I don't think you'll mind. I'll quote Tom Cairns, who used to do all of the sales training for the IBM channels and things. And I'm sure we can talk about, might be a bit 80s, some of their style, but his wasn't. It was very much about making sure that the buyer and the seller are on the same page. And your CRM can help with that. You can go back and say, well, did we actually send the proposal on time? Did we actually answer that question, etc.? So, the buyer relationships, having that strength will help reduce that risk. And obviously, you want to see how revenue is growing. We've talked before about we're not looking for hockey stick. We're looking at maybe exponential growth or linear growth, predictable growth. Yeah, because it's also making sure that we're not overproducing or underproducing in the factory, for example. So, yeah, and sure, revenue's lovely. Very sales-orientated people will normally tell you that revenue solves all problems. Fortunately, that's not quite true because, you'll get bitten on the bottom in the future if you're not making any margin. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, in short, and I'll open up to you for further questions around what I was saying, but in short, the entire organization needs to be aligned. And we'll get into some of those, how we can do that in a moment, if you want. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really interesting because you mentioned an example that you were talking early this week with a friend. And immediately I came back to mind because those heroics, and if you don't have the CRM or a system that enables you to understand your pipeline from beginning to end, even after in delivery, you are going to be unable to find some of those that goes. And you look at revenue is great. Why isn't our margin? It's because, yeah, the greatest salespeople are able to sell the future, but with the features you have now, and you'll get there. But one of the biggest challenges, as you mentioned, is sometimes is that cowboy that goes and says, we'll adjust in price, we'll give you, we'll put that feature on, because they're, and we'll talk about later, but it's also in terms of alignment, in terms of incentives, which is important.
Yeah.
And so this is more of a view. And that's what I wanted to ask is, what's your view? Is this more on from a building revenue? Is it more like using a system rather than just a siloed department of individuals, like revenue orchestration? You were mentioning the importance of CRM, but there is other pieces, meetings in between the teams, so that everybody cross team understand what's going on, and you prevent some of these issues. Like, we're going to do X amount of revenue, fantastic, but that is going to cost us a bucket load more. So maybe not now.
I'm quite happy to sort of break this down and, I'll break it down into some steps and some methodology around it. But before I bore everybody with that, we just think of it in terms of, as you say, about the individual versus systems and silos. Think about a restaurant. So, if you've got front of house staff, so the maitre d' or the head waiter or the waiter, if they're directly getting all of the tips and they're incentivized, is that a good thing? They're also the one who's going to get all of the complaints and all the rest of it. But everybody is making sure that the service is perfect, that the right ingredients have been purchased at the right price to make a margin, but at the quality level that will keep people happy. Then you've got the kitchen staff who are probably making those purchases, but the kitchen staff who are then preparing the food, and they need to make sure they get clear orders and they're changing the menu regular enough that you can make money on it, but you can keep customers coming back. And then you've got the front of house staff have to seamlessly work together. And if everybody's working as a team, everybody understands the quality of what you're trying to not, to put out there, and keep all of the covers happy and served on time and price points correct and all the rest of it. It's a massive team effort. And I think the restaurant analogy is great because it doesn't matter whether you're the runner, the dishwasher, the bar staff, you all have got to work really well. So you need shared incentives, you need shared performance, you need a shared vision. And that will help you with predictable revenue again, right? And predictable profits. Now that's I don't think it's an oversimplification for the restaurant. It's not an easy business, but you can see how restaurants are typically difficult to invest in, and they tend to, start off really well and then wane off a bit, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is the same as if you're doing things like channel sales, right? You get great partners on board, you get them onboarded, they're all excited, but you forget to nurture them and look after them, and it wanes off. You don't change the roadmap, you don't change the menu. Yeah, you don't adapt your pricing to what's going on in the market because there's new competition or whatever it is. You've got to keep fresh, etc.
yeah, it's as you say, it's a team. It's a teamwork. It's team sport. Everybody needs to be at their best, and everybody needs to be focusing on their best. And yes, sales is not it's not everybody's job title, but it's everybody's job to be some part in helping the sales complete. So, and you said you had some models and so on. So let's talk more about making this work in this cross disciplinary team. So what does it take to operationalize this sale-led thinking across the board?
I've had this referred to me as the modern revenue engine, and you can maybe talk about sales process or sales process optimization, for example. And I've worked in-house in companies. I've also worked with consultancy firms helping these companies, and that there are some rudimentary steps. So lead generation. So if you think about lead generation, that's going to be things like field marketing, right? It's, it can be referrals, it can be websites, et cetera, et cetera. It can be trade shows, all the rest of it. You then need to be able to qualify that. And who's qualifying that? Well, sure, the salesperson can qualify it, but they need to qualify it against some criteria that they've been given, i.e., this is our value proposition, this is the customer segment that we want to go to, this is the economics of that customer, the size of them, etc. To qualify those things, can they afford to buy it, whatever it might be? Are we their preference, to have a cloud-based rather than desktop or whatever it might be? And then obviously you go through a discovery with the customer to make sure that you and the customer are aligned with expectations and wishes. And a big thing for me is you don't send a proposal out unless you think you're going to win it, or there's a very good chance you're going to win it. So, I'm a big advocate. I cheat a bit. I tend to send these indicative proposals and things like that, which is a discussion document, but you want it to be there 90% there already. If you're not 90% there, you haven't asked the right questions during discovery. Why are you wanting to buy something like this now? What's it going to solve for you? How much money are you going to save by buying it from us, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously you want to close that off. But when you've closed it off, so what we've done here, lead generation working with marketing. So silos, you don't want like the kitchen staff with the waiters arguing about the reason why the food was cold that it arrived on the table. So often sales and marketing have done the same fighting together, right? So if there's a trade show, what's the objective of the trade show? How many business cards are we going to get? How many leads are we going to get? How many of those leads do you think we can convert? Was it worth the cost of doing the trade show, etc.? So that whole lead generation, qualification, discovery, proposal, closing the sale, that involves finance, product management, for technical pre-sales perhaps, marketing, sales. And you need to start getting customer service involved here because the next thing is onboarding. So there might be technical people, it might be training people, it might be, account managers. And if you don't onboard well, then you're not going to really activate it. And if you're doing a very transactional business, it's not just about, yes, we've got them to sign it off, because you want it to grow and scale. Yeah, you want more users, you want it to be sticky, you don't want churn, you want it to expand, you want to be able to cross-sell. So again, all those same people are now going to be involved in cross-selling and expanding and all the rest of it. So onboarding, activation, expansion, repeat orders. Guess what? You're keeping your CRM up to date all the way through here. It wasn't just a pipeline to close. This is, a lifetime management of the customer. And you're learning so much from here. So as you learn, you can improve things like your sales cheat sheets. What's the value proposition to whom? And can we expand the segmentation? Can we cross-sell something else to them? Can we feed this back into R&D, etc.?
And it's very important because you mentioned the importance of getting, so for example, early days, the marketing and sales teams, because you need to understand what is our lead generation. It can be different channels. Each channel has a budget. And there's a goal. But also then you went and mentioned the almost a deal review before the deal goes through, sitting down everybody, and you mentioned customer success, because I think that's a key element, because that's what makes it so that you don't overpromise something, or whatever you promise you can deliver. Because the challenge is, if there is a disconnect between sales with either product management, the engineering team, or the customer success, that will be significant in terms of costs and impacts. And that discipline of doing the deal reviews is something that you mentioned, and something that I've lived. And the criticality is, you stop getting so much cowboy sales, which is very important.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me. I said customer service, but customer success is what I meant. I'm an old dog, so that's a fairly modern term, but I think it's what we've always thought of in terms of, you don't necessarily have to have the best price point, the best product, etc., but you need to be able to nurture your customer and make sure that they can use your product well and all that sort of stuff. I think there's a few things some other baby steps that we would need to make sure that scaling businesses are following, and to remind why. Because I've also operated in businesses with, hundreds of people or thousands of people, and I've operated where I've just been the only one doing it sometimes. And if you've got the mental capacity, you might get away without having a CRM, but you're never going to be able to duplicate that effort. You're not going to be able to train someone else. You're not going to be able to sell the business to someone else if you want to retire or succession plan or whatever it is. So this, again, is the importance of not just the CRM, but being able to share the methodology across the organization and for new players, etc., or training channel partners. So there's a lot of things that we can do. And Nuno, as you know, I've been working quite closely with Andrew Bailey for Bailey Partners, and we often joke, when we go to a meeting, and we're helping maybe someone in M&A advisory capacity for perhaps getting ready to sell the business, or someone who's, or we're helping someone to acquire a business, and we want to make sure that these things are in place. And we tease each other often, because Andy broke all the records in the company that he was working at. I went to go and work for that company and broke his records. And there's that competitiveness. But what I'm not trying to, so I don't want to kill that competitiveness. I don't want to, to get rid of that hungry money motivation. You need to have that, but you also need to be a team player as well. You can't just be a lone wolf or a cowboy. So how do we do that? There are, we talked about, working across the organization in terms of shared values, etc. But some really specific things, like have weekly sales meetings or even daily sales meetings, right? Because it's like, what did you do last week? What are you doing this week? What's working? What's not working? Let's learn from each other. I'm going to correct you, and you're going to thank me for correcting you, or helping you. Yeah, let's call it helping rather than correcting. So things like daily updates are great. I mean, I remember the days when, you would have to dial in and listen to the sales director, the voice message. And I don't want to have these weekly "you guys suck" meetings. It's very much about how do we help each other, and creating that culture of not hiding things and learning and improving and sharing that across. And CRM capture, okay, we've been waxing lyrical a bit about AI. I haven't really found that many great tools around CRM, but apparently there's some good ones coming to help, or are in place to help you automate some of this stuff. But already all of them will do things like, make sure your emails go into the right place and you keep a record of everything. So that's super. The more sophisticated ones will help you credit check and qualify the customer, etc. as well, right? Which brings in some automation between the departments. Then we can get sophisticated in terms of looking at, buying signals, pattern recognition, stuff that you're probably more into than I am, in terms of, these signals, but it can help you channel your efforts as well. So scaling, as we said right at the beginning, is keeping focus as well and getting market penetration rather than just trying to do it, shotgun. Fundamentals. So all of these things I've just talked about, you can't, for example, if you're quite an early stage business and you're still finding your feet and you're doing the Richard Branson thing, which is like, they'll buy from us, but we don't know how to deliver it yet, but we're just going to go for it. Some people can do that. The founders often can. It's very difficult to recruit a sales team to do that. They really want to know a very clear brand and proposition foundations, right? So clear value proposition, really nice, clear, consistent. I love consistent words and phrases documents rather than just a brand guideline. You can draw outside of the line, sure, but there's a consistent tone of voice and message, naming, branding, product naming. Hate for me is when people get too complicated. That I love concrete names. Okay, with the lead generation, you also want to make sure you're getting the right leads to come and qualify. So when you do things like SEO and stuff like that, you don't just choose whatever the cheapest auction name is. You get the ones that actually fit for who you want. You can't send new salespeople out or a new sales team or grow a sales team without really good sales collateral. And sure, it's decks and data sheets, battle cards, but I love to use the term cheat sheets, right? So there's just a few things that you can remind yourself that you need to always ask the customer. So, just I think things you ask the customer, not the things you tell the customer.
And that's
right?
a great point because it's about this needs to become repeatable. There is a time when you need to be more of a founder mindset of we'll figure it out. But even the figure it out people already have an idea of, they know what the value prop, they know what the pricing, the naming, all of that. If you don't, then it's going to be hard to figure something out. Then you're just going off the rails. But it's getting that repeatability that is critical. And those weekly or daily, and sometimes is weekly with a multidisciplinary team to go over the risks, as you mentioned, and then more daily with the sales team and so on. But it's important because it's operationalizing and it's becoming repeatable. And in those things, are there internal metrics that when you're evaluating an investment or something, are there internal metrics that matter most when scaling commercial maturity that you look into?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously it tweaks a little bit between different industries and size of firms, but we're normally looking at lifetime value, cost per acquisition, margins on different products, seasonality on the products, the old BCG matrix in terms of where you're making the most money, your and the cash cow, where's your rising star, what's your problem child, those things are worth doing that exercise. I look at those things. The other thing is obviously you're looking at trends. You might have some seasonality, sure, but you want to be seeing the revenue tracking upwards. You're not going to invest in a company that's going backwards. Now, so the revenue is important. It might be so early that they're not actually making any money at the moment, but is the margin improving? Is the revenue going up? And it might be that the costs aren't dramatically coming down yet, but they're becoming more stable. There's less of a roller coaster going on with the cost because they're managing their supply chain better, etc. They're getting better terms. There's less wastage. They're done with the experimenting and they're settling in, right? So that again, predictability on the revenue, on the costs, the margins, and you're looking for signals that it can be duplicated. So they might have a distribution partner that's going really well, and that it's not an exclusive thing, and they can duplicate that with other distribution partners, other channel partners. They might have not the sole sales director stroke CEO, but actually they've got a few people working in sales, and you can see every time they add a new salesperson, it's quite linear in terms of adding to the sales growth. So you're seeing that predictable revenue, and they probably have only been able to do that if they got the foundations right, the value proposition, the marketing collateral, etc. We said, but there's other tools you can give people as well, right? So I would look to see if they have those tools. So, one acquisition recently, I had a look to see at their proposals, and how consistent the proposals are. So do they have a frame agreement? Do they have, bid templates? Do they have the team structured so that they're looking at territories, channels, customer segments, maybe aligning by product? Ideally, they're aligning by customer, not by product, so they can cross-sell, So territory and channel strategies, I'm not looking to see if they've just got a nice deck to say that they have that. I'm looking at evidence that's actually working. So if it's doing really well in Sweden, if they then launch it in Finland, it won't duplicate exactly, but can 90% of it duplicate, or has it duplicated? If that's the case, you're going to be able to go to the rest of the Nordics, then Northern Europe, then maybe USA or whatever it might be. So I'm looking at these patterns of being prepared and being able to execute, and knowing that if we pump more money in, then that's going to be able to duplicate.
Yeah, it's that repeatability element that you're mentioning. If the foundations are right and you see repeatability in a country or a region, then it's more probable that you can expand. If you try to scale too fast and you don't see that repeatability, and for example, you were talking about the kind of pipeline to rep, are you seeing a very similar ratio of the pipeline and the time it takes in order to do a proposal and all those things? Is it very similar? Because then you can extrapolate, and if you can't extrapolate, then it's a problem. And talking about those, what, from your perspective and what you've seen, causes the biggest disconnect between execution, sales execution, and revenue predictability? Are there
Right.
any key elements that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, you're just saying about extrapolating that information. So I think it's quite good to look back and think, how many touch points were there? And perhaps why was there a delay between touch points, or why we were not answering correctly? So it might go back to see, was there a bottleneck in the organization? So sure, we're analyzing the proposal or the deals, but are we losing momentum because that's stuck on the CFO's desk or something like that? So that's one of those things, to make sure that we not just have a sales process in place, but we're optimizing the sales process and we're getting rid of bottlenecks, or we're empowering people where we need to empower them, or we're giving people transparency and clear communication where we need to as well. Yeah, and there's behavioral aspects there, and we might also find that maybe the incentives are skewed too much to one individual or one department or something as well. So whatever it is, we need to find out where those problem areas are, and and they're normally solvable.
Yeah, they are typically solvable, but it's about having the right metrics.
Yeah,
You need to look at this as an end to end. And as you mentioned, it's not only thinking about the revenue process, it's the engine. You need to look at the engine and understand, okay, what are all the elements that the engine is going to do? And when you mentioned that, is I remember about somewhere where I was working, and in one of my first few days, I didn't know a lot. And one of the first things was, okay, let me sit down and let's talk about, from when we identify a lead, what happens until actually the customer is satisfied and so on. And everybody looked weird, and it's like, okay, I imagine there is a process somehow. And we actually wrote on the walls what that was. And even that simple thing, identify a whole lot of bottlenecks that you go, why is this needed to be approved by all these people? Or now I understand where I need to measure the timing that it goes. But sometimes and I'm very visual, is just have a conversation, draw a couple of weird boxes, depending on your skill set in drawing, and see, visualize, because it's easier. Then you can do the metrics, which is very important. And then once the engine is running, we can go and say, okay, now the engine is running on our main location, and then how do we scale abroad? And that's leads us to the next segment, which is kind of international commercial strategy. A lot of companies go through and they launch in the Nordics, in the UK, in the US, and they are phenomenal. And then they try to go international and whole hell breaks loose. So what frameworks do you use for entering new markets from a sales first perspective?
Well, you did the writing on the wall, right? You went through the process to see what you have at the time. So some regulated industries, you have to document that, right? So, if you're in a fintech or insurtech or something like that, you have to document that. You have to make sure that such things as different countries have different rules. So if you've got that process already, then great. Then you need to look to see, will that process still work in another country? And on the insurtech, for example, some countries you can just say, hey, would you like to insure this today? Great, fine, done. Yep. Other countries, you need to be able to send them the offer, and they need to be able to read the offer and sign it and send it back. So you can't just do it over the phone. Others will have a cooling off period, for example. So, so it's important to be able to document these things and then have a look to see how it will change. And when we look at the wide across the company, so the product, the finance guys, etc., we do need to look to see what is the same in those other countries and what will be different. So Brazil is hell when it comes to things like e-invoicing, right? So I think every district has a different e-invoicing, way of doing it. But, there is one company there as a platform that will help you enable to do that. So that's great. But different countries have different ways of taking payment, is what I'm, partly saying, right? So like China never bothered with credit cards. They went straight into, mobile pay and all that sort of stuff. So you do need to look at all of that. You need to look at the customer journey, and then obviously that will reflect how people are selling. The other one is a big thing for international sales is channels are different. So, Japan has been always notorious for having huge amounts of people in the different people, in terms of wholesalers and distributors and retailers, etc. It tends to be more complicated than other countries. We're moving to so many firms now just doing direct to consumer, for example. Can you get away with that in every country? I don't know. Yeah. So you need to study the different countries, but you need to know what you're doing, what works for you already in your domestic market or the markets you're already in. You need to have people local, probably. So if you're, I don't know, food and beverage or something like that, selling into retail, you're going to need the account manager for the big retailers and wholesalers in each country, right? They've got to be at the end of the phone. There's still a bit of smiling and dialing. They're still knocking on doors. There's still shoe leather to be worn out. So let me try and put that a little bit more succinctly. The customer journey, you try to keep it as similar as you can. You know what works, but you might need to change it from a localization point of view and from a regulatory point of view. It might be different by different countries. You will have, what works in your country at that point, but you will likely need to have people in country. And often investors will say, right, fine, you want to go to the US. Who's going to move to the US? Do you have kids? Are they in school? Do you really want to be going back every other 2 weeks? You'll be exhausted. You'll be burned out. You're not going to be very motivated to do the sales there. So even if you hire some salespeople there, are you going to be doing the calls at 10 p.m. on a Friday night? So you need to think about local staff. And that goes back to everything we talked about already. It's like, do you have everything ready to be able to train those local staffs? Yeah. And not just duplicate it, but adjust it for those markets.
Yeah, it's not about, as you say, it's not about jumping the gun. You need to think about what is, as you mentioned, is it a replicable playbook? Do you have enough that is build global? So you have a hub model where you are building most of the things, but then the last mile, you have the spoke, you have the ability to adjust in saying, are we going to use the same type of channels, or do we need to go through partnership channels or things like that? That's, as you mentioned, it's the importance of knowing the market. And for that is almost like going and doing a market readiness matrix. So, okay, this is ready, this is missing. And then that's, as you mentioned, there's a lot of companies that go, I'm going to launch now in the US. Great. But I don't want to go there and I don't have anybody there. Well, that might be a challenge
Hmm.
unless you
Yeah.
use partnerships, which might be a potential route. But in that case, you need to be ready to have an intermediary in there because it might be a different playbook. And
Yeah, and then you get the
that's
partner.
very
You get the
interesting.
partner. Have you got the materials for the partner that they can actually understand what's going on? Do you trust the partner? Have you got reference cases? So you might not have ever been to the US before, but perhaps you've sold to the same type of customers that they're out there, or you've sold to a division in the other country. So you've got to have those public references, as well.
Yeah,
No one
and
wants to be the
sometimes you
first
need
one to buy
to
from you. Yeah.
and sometimes you actually need to go, and it's part of your investment. You need to invest in order to get those reference cases. Sometimes, so being from Europe or Asia going to the US or the other way around, the markets are different, the customers are different. Know your customer and then figure out, because there's always been these challenges of, okay, European companies going to US. It's a different model, different style of sales, the same thing the other way around. And so if you don't create a way, a repeatable way that creates the core and then adapts lightly, it's going to be challenging. And that's a very important piece. So the other part is becoming a global sales team. What, from your perspective, is the most underrated aspect of building that global sales team, that great global sales team? Is there anything you've seen so far?
Most underrated. Well, it's like anything. It's like a marriage or whatever it might be. It's communication, right? So I did and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying so. So one of the first customers I worked with when I moved to Finland a number of years ago, Blanco, leader in data erasure, the most certified one, and they ended up having a really successful exit. But to begin with, I basically put together their international channel strategy, and the frustration of the country managers, which was either wholly owned subsidiary or was basically a reseller, was not getting an answer. It wasn't being told no. They of course wanted to get a yes, but if they just got a maybe or never heard back. So the communication and the cadence of the communication was really important. They got a fast response, and they also felt like they were being listened to. So we weren't necessarily going to go and change all the product attributes for them, but we were listening to them and we were reasoning it, and we're looking to see if there was a business case behind it. We'd look at localizing, marketing, pricing, etc. And what worked really well after probably people being a bit frustrated was we put a CRM in, which to them felt like a stick, right? Why? Why do we have to have the CRM? So we balanced that with giving a marketing development fund. And because how I am, to get the marketing development fund, you had to fill in a very simple form, which is, this is the trade show that I want to do. This is the focus of the audience. This is how many leads I think I'll be able to generate. This is how much business I think I can do at the back of it. And if that looked good, we'd say, great, fine, 50% from the marketing development fund from us, 50% from you as the local reseller. And then the next time that trade show comes up, they fill the form in again. What were the results from the last one? You did put it in the CRM, didn't you? Because if it can't qualify it, they're not going to get the money. But what happened was we ended up doing lots more activity, and we did lots more activity that worked. And we weren't just going to the friend of a friend's trade show because someone had asked them and it's not their money. Yeah. We were doing the trade shows that were focused on, for them at that point, it was a lot of electronics refurbishers and those sort of things, data security, cybersecurity events. So having the discipline of the CRM, marketing development fund, regular communication, quick responses, even if it's a no, and always justify why, really helped. And to launch this sort of channel strategy initiative, and it was, I write a stupid big thick document, but we actually did a very simple workshop presentation, workshopped a little bit so it feels more like a change management thing. But that we did that face to face. So we found a sort of like an easy country for everybody to get to. And we basically said, we're here to help you. We've heard your frustrations. We've now streamlined so that you're going to get quick answers. You're going to get marketing support for generating leads. You're going to get better support on, our customer success and onboarding. You're going to get all of these new materials. We'll do press releases together. You'll get an answer back from R&D on product development. We're going to get your partners and channel partners and stuff together more often, etc. And we put a great plan together, and it worked super well. Right, the company grew revenue, and they ended up exiting. And the then sales director and deputy MD didn't buy into the CRM at that point in time. Well, he did. He couldn't get people to buy in. And it was quite simple, which is like, I can't get them to fill it in. That's okay. They're on a revenue share. If it's not in the CRM, they don't get the revenue share. And guess what? Everybody filled it in. So it was a bit of a carrot and a stick, but in general, people were very quick to come back and say, thank you. This is now working. And it allowed us to duplicate that effort, not just to fix a few, say, communication issues, but to do it. So what was the question from you was, what is the most, I think, like the undervalued, aspect? Well, the undervalued here was just to put some basic systems in place that unlocked the opportunities.
Yeah, and that's a very important part, because it's unlocking is the rhythm, the communication, the fluency, the listening, because sometimes it's just listening. But also by doing all of that, you end up also needing to think about the capacity that you have. If we open a new region, a new market, do we have the capacity across the team in order to give those answers? Do we need to expand the team? Do we need to change our process, automate, or something like that? That's very important, because
Yeah.
it's not also how you create the great teams, is how do you then protect the focus when you're expanding into those countries? And that's one of the biggest challenges. Is there any elements that you see that are critical to protecting that company focus while you're expanding?
Well, it's a bit of a boring answer, but one thing to think about is that often, the budgets need to expand as the revenue grows as well if you expand into these other countries. And it is more expensive when you first land. And you do have to think carefully about which country you land in for a new, say, wider geographical area. So I've set 2 companies up in Singapore, for example, which is a really good shop window for ASEAN or Southeast Asia countries, because, it's, little corruption, everything's sort of set up, it's easy, everything's in English and all the rest of it. But it's expensive. You take a client out for dinner, it's going to be expensive, right? So you could go across the bridge to Malaysia and it'd be cheaper, but then you would face other problems. So that's important. And then obviously we've talked about Latin America before, and choosing the right partners in those areas is so important. And when we talk about going to like the US, you can't just think we're going to set an office up in the US. You need at least an East Coast and a West Coast, time zone people. And dare I say it, the US is not one country. You've got 52 states with different rules and regulations and different cultural perspective. And I won't dwell on this too much, but I'm doing, I think for the second year running, I'm doing some training for some scaling businesses here in Finland on internationalization or global, going global. And I spend a lot of time with them talking about people's attitudes, willing to adapt and learn. And I don't just mean spoken language, but just, not dwelling on generalizations and stereotypes, but you do have to prepare to get to know your customer in a social setting in certain countries, etc. Right? It's those sort of things. So you do have to leverage your social capital that hopefully you've built up,
Yeah, and the
more so in some
discipline,
countries than
as you
others.
mentioned, is the discipline of those checkpoints in terms of budget, in terms of what you know. And one of the things you mentioned that, but it happens in both directions. When you go, I always find it interesting, or a kind of flag in order to ask more, when someone goes, we're now expanding to US. It's like, huh, a lot of states. So how are you going to do this? Where are they, as you said, thinking of east, west coast? What are they planning? Because if they aren't talking about that, then probably they haven't thought about it. It's the same thing as a US company going and saying, we're going to Europe. It's like, great. that is even worse because you now have different currencies, different tax laws, different everything. So it's always
and even just different economics.
generalization.
Yeah, different economics. I mean, distant affordability across Europe is massively. Look at the differences on salaries and, etc. Yeah.
And so we are now talking about more on the leadership. So let's bring this home to,
Yeah.
in order for this to succeed, what kind of mindset drives a commercially elite culture? What is the one belief about sales that leadership needs to challenge or evolve from your perspective?
Yeah. At the risk of feeling like I'm kind of repeating myself, we've talked in the past about how the CEO needs to think like the finance guy, and how the CFO needs to think more commercially and all the rest of it. And it's the same as everybody needs to appreciate the sales function, but they need to understand the fundamentals of the value proposition, the value that you're taking to your customers. Who are your customers? It doesn't mean that everybody's going to be a salesperson in the organization. That's a misnomer. So you can't do that. If you're a law firm, an accountancy firm, maybe a medical doctor's practice or something, you probably have to if you're a small firm. But if you're a software firm, for example, an enterprise software firm, you can't expect software engineers to be salespeople. You're just going to make them terribly uncomfortable. They won't be able to focus on their job, all the rest of it. Now, if they want to get into pre-sales and do technical support, if they want to do customer success and onboarding, then great. Yeah. All of these functions. So is allowing people to understand where sales fits in and how they're needing everybody else to make their job work. And you need them too, because revenue is going to pay you salary that month.
Yeah, and as kind of wrapping it up, as you mentioned before, sometimes you hear sales a push or it's somewhere else's responsibility. Actually, sales is an engine. It's that modern revenue engine that requires leadership and requires rhythm, requires clarity, and all of those things. So it's a cultural difference from looking at sales and revenue generation as one of the parts of the business to actually saying that's everybody's responsibility, is about making sure that it either affects positively the revenue or affects positively the margins. Because if not, it's going to have, on the long term, you're going to have a nasty discovery on your valuation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think, I think it's been a good discussion. I think this isn't about sales training. This is obviously about the importance about getting the valuation up in these businesses. That we've talked a lot about things like the predictable revenue, but I think these things can get complicated. If we, rather than my 11 steps of moats I've got in front of me now, I think it's just 2 steps, right? Which build the foundations: proposition, pricing, branding, channel and territory planning, all of those support materials that needed around that can be tweaked and improved as you go along. Really good channels of communication, feedback loops, etc. So that's, you start doing that, and then you start, you might already have that working really well in one country. So go and test it in the other country. Or if you're really early stage business, go test it. Doesn't matter if you make mistakes, just, pivot on that. But then when you're scaling, you'll use all of those things because you'll keep improving them all the time. When you're having those weekly sales calls, you're not just saying, here's the sales deck. You're also saying, well, what objection handling did you have this week, and who learned what, and maybe something's changed in the market, and we can change our communication a little bit about that. So you're then duplicating those things that are good at creating leads or demand generation. You're expanding those channels by maybe moving into new territories or duplicating the channel, resellers or whatever you might have. You're doing more trade shows. You're getting bigger at the trade shows. You're getting better at the follow-ups, reducing those number of touch points that you need to have with the customer, because you're asking more questions, or the more relevant questions, earlier on. So you're not having to go backwards and forwards like a yo-yo. with the customer. And you've made it very clear and easy for them to buy. It's amazing how companies make it very difficult for people to buy. And then, you're adding a whole cadence and a rhythm to this in the business so that deals are sanity checked by people across different departments so that stuff then gets delivered on time, right? And you make a margin on it.
Fantastic. So, Rob, thank you very much. This was a session packed with frameworks, metrics, mindset upgrades. You've helped us really see what revenue is and that it isn't just an outcome. It's about the whole thing. It's an executive discipline. So, to our audience, please share this with all your teams, from your go-to-market teams to your sales, marketing, and so on, and follow Rob on LinkedIn. And let's continue the conversation going forward. Thank you very much, Rob, for taking the time and for all of this journey, because over the last 7 episodes, we really unpacked what it means to lead, not just grow, and what it means in order to create valuation. In a time where capital, technology, and markets are shifting faster than ever, from Gen AI strategy to cross-border scaling, fundraising, volatility, and so on, this series has been a chance to step back, reflect, share not just what you've done, but you've learned and what we've learned. So what is very clear is that during this whole series, it was leadership is increasingly about pattern recognition, discipline, human clarity, and whether you're in the boardroom, scaling a venture, or guiding your first go-to-market playbook, I hope these insights help you feel more confident and more connected to the journey ahead. So thank you very much, Rob, for this amazing insights.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Nuno.
Thank you very much. And we would love to continue the conversation. So join us on LinkedIn and subscribe to MyFractionalCEO. And let's keep building the real value together. And as a last element is, think about having the opportunity of having someone like Rob helping you, because when you move to a new country, why are you just going and investing a lot in someone new? Hire someone on a fractional basis, someone that has been there, done that. And that's an opportunity that you'll have to thrive into the future. Thank you very much.
And if I may add, and if you're also looking for a liquidation event, or you're looking to raise capital, working capital, for example, could be debt or could be equity. A lot of what we talked about today is what I can help prepare companies to be able to show to investors and to potential strategic buyers.
So fantastic conversation, and definitely someone that it's available to help you in whatever capacity is needed in order to make this a great connection. So thank you very much, and look forward for our future conversation. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Nuno.